Move along, old man, the TSA agent said, pushing past his wheelchair. You're holding up the line. What happened next silenced the entire terminal. Denver International Airport at 07:30 a.m. was always chaos. Thousands of passengers rushing through security checkpoints, desperately trying not to miss their flights. In Terminal A, the security line stretched back toward the main concourse. Business travelers checked their phones impatiently. Families struggled to corral excited children, and everyone seemed consumed by their own urgent schedule. In this controlled chaos, David Walsh was nearly invisible in his wheelchair. At 58 years old, he had steel gray hair, weathered hands, and eyes that had seen too much. His legs had been gone for 15 years now, lost to an IED explosion in Iraq. But that story remained locked away in classified files and painful memories that he rarely shared. Most people saw only the wheelchair, never bothering to notice the man who occupied it. David had learned to navigate airports with quiet efficiency. He arrived early, moved slowly, and avoided drawing attention to himself. The wheelchair was just another piece of equipment to most travelers, an inconvenience that slowed down security lines and complicated boarding procedures. He had grown accustomed to the sikus, the sideways glances, the impatient tapping of feet when he required additional screening. TSA agent Marcus Thompson was having a particularly stressful morning. At 28 years old, he took his job seriously, but the pressure to move passengers through security quickly often overwhelmed his patience. He had been working since 05 Huntwalk a.m., processing hundreds of travelers, dealing with forgotten laptops, oversized liquids, and the endless stream of complaints about wait times. When Thompson spotted David's wheelchair approaching his checkpoint, he involuntarily sighed. Wheelchair passengers required additional screening protocols, pat-downs, manual searches, equipment testing. It would slow down his line just when the morning rush was reaching its peak. The businessman behind David, Robert Chen, was already checking his expensive Rolex. His flight to Chicago was boarding in 45 minutes, and he still needed to grab coffee and make several important calls. The sight of the wheelchair passenger ahead of him triggered immediate frustration. "This is going to take forever," Chen muttered to his colleague, not bothering to lower his voice. "Why can't they have separate lines for situations like this?" A young mother with 2 small children, Sarah Mitchell, stood behind Chen. She was traveling alone with her kids to visit her deployed husband at Fort Hood. The 4-year-old was getting restless, and the 2-year-old was starting to fuss. The last thing she needed was additional delays. "Honey, we need to be patient," she told her older child, though her own patience was wearing thin. Thompson approached David's wheelchair with professional detachment. "Good morning, sir. I'll need to see your boarding pass and ID." David reached into his worn leather wallet, the same wallet he'd carried for 20 years, and produced his identification. The card read, David Walsh, DOB, 03-15-1966. Nothing on it indicated military service, disability status, or the Purple Heart medal currently hidden beneath his simple denim jacket. "Gate C-32, David said quietly, handing over his Southwest Airlines boarding pass. Thompson scanned the documents quickly. "Destination Dallas?" "Yes, sir." "Purpose of travel?" David hesitated. This question always made him uncomfortable. "How do you explain that you're visiting the families of Marines you saved 15 years ago? How do you describe attending a memorial service for brothers in arms whose names are etched in your memory but unknown to the world?" "Personal visit," he answered simply. Thompson nodded without really listening. He'd heard thousands of similar responses. "I'll need you to move to the special screening area. Please pull your wheelchair to the side," The special screening area was off to the left, separated from the main security line by retractable barriers. It was designed for passengers who couldn't use the standard metal detectors, wheelchair users, passengers with medical devices, and anyone requiring additional assistance. As David maneuvered his wheelchair toward the designated area, the other passengers in line watched with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. Some felt genuine sympathy for his situation. Others saw only an obstacle to their own urgent schedules. Flight attendant Jessica Rodriguez, deadheading to her next assignment in Phoenix, noticed the growing tension in the line. As a veteran herself, Air Force, 4 years active duty, she recognized something in David's bearing that most civilians missed. The way he held his shoulders, the alert way his eyes scanned his surroundings, the quiet dignity with which he accepted the inconvenience of additional screening. These were markers of military training that never fully disappeared. Thompson began the standard screening procedure. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remove your jacket and any items from your pockets." David unbuttoned his denim jacket slowly. His movements were careful, deliberate, not from infirmity, but from years of living with chronic pain that he'd learned to manage without complaint. As he shrugged out of the jacket, the Purple Heart medal became visible on the left breast of his white t-shirt. The Purple Heart is immediately recognizable to anyone with military knowledge. The distinctive heart-shaped medal, purple with a gold border, bearing the profile of George Washington, is one of America's most revered decorations. It is awarded exclusively to service members who have been wounded or killed in combat against an enemy of the United States. Thompson, focused on checking David's jacket pockets, didn't immediately notice the medal. He was going through the routine motions, checking for weapons, electronics, or prohibited items. But Jessica Rodriguez, with her military background, spotted it immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for the passengers around her to hear. "Purple Heart." The businessman Robert Chen looked up from his phone. "What's a Purple Heart?" "It means he was wounded in combat," Rodriguez explained, her voice carrying a mixture of reverence and respect. "You only get that medal if you shed blood for your country." Chen's expression changed immediately. His impatience transformed into curiosity, then into something approaching shame. Here he was, complaining about a few minutes' delay, while the man causing the delay was a combat veteran who had sacrificed his body in service to his nation. Thompson finally noticed the medal and stopped his search. He looked at David with new eyes, seeing not just a wheelchair passenger, but a wounded warrior. "Sir, is that a Purple Heart?" David nodded simply. "Yes." "Where did you serve?" "Iraq. Multiple deployments." Thompson felt a flush of embarrassment. His own father had served in the Gulf War, and he'd grown up with deep respect for military service. He should have recognized the signs, the bearing, the calm acceptance of authority, the quiet dignity that marked career military personnel. Rodriguez stepped out of her place in line and approached the screening area. "Sir, I'm Air Force veteran myself. May I ask which unit you served with?" David looked at her, recognizing a fellow veteran in her posture and direct gaze. "1st Battalion, 8th Marines, Heavy Weapons Platoon." Rodriguez knew enough about Marine Corps organization to understand the significance. Heavy Weapons Platoon meant mortars, machine guns, anti-tank systems, the Marines who provided firepower support when things got serious. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" David's jaw tightened slightly. He'd told this story so many times to doctors, psychiatrists, and disability reviewers that it had become almost mechanical. but telling it to fellow service members always felt different, more personal, more meaningful. March 27th, 2009, Fallujah Province, IED attack on our convoy. The small crowd that had gathered around the screening area fell silent. Even passengers who didn't understand military terminology recognized the gravity in David's voice. We were conducting a security patrol in Sector 7 Alpha. 3 vehicles, 24 Marines total, standard route clearance operation. David's voice took on the measured tone of someone giving an after-action report. At 11:30 a.m., lead vehicle struck a buried IED, improvised explosive device. The blast flipped the Humvee and trapped 4 Marines inside. Thompson found himself leaning in, completely forgetting about screening procedures. What happened next? Immediately after the IED detonation, we started receiving small arms fire from 3 directions. Classic L-shaped ambush. The enemy had positioned themselves to catch us in a kill zone after the initial blast disabled our lead vehicle. David paused, his mind returning to that dusty Iraqi street where everything had gone wrong in a matter of seconds. My vehicle was second in line. The explosion threw debris against our windshield, but we were still mobile. The third vehicle, bringing up the rear, had engine damage from secondary shrapnel, but could still move. Rodriguez recognized the tactical description. This wasn't just a random roadside bomb. This had been a carefully planned ambush designed to inflict maximum casualties. "How many insurgents?" she asked. Intelligence estimates later put it at 15 to 20 fighters, dug in positions with pre-planned fields of fire. They had RPGs, AK-47s, and at least 1 PKM machine gun. Sarah Mitchell, the young mother, had been listening with growing amazement. Her husband was deployed in Afghanistan, and she'd heard similar stories in letters and phone calls. But hearing it firsthand from someone who'd lived through it was different. "Sir," she said quietly, "my husband's a Marine. He's deployed right now. What you went through, I can't imagine." David looked at her with understanding eyes. Military spouses carried their own burden. The constant worry, the sleepless nights, the challenge of raising children while their partner faced danger half a world away. "What's your husband's MOS?" David asked, using the military term for military occupational specialty. 0311, Rifleman. David nodded with respect. "The backbone of the Corps. Tell him a fellow Marine said Semper Fi." The moment was interrupted by Thompson, who had been following the conversation with growing fascination. "Sir, you still haven't told us how you got wounded. What happened after the ambush started?" David's expression grew more serious. This was the part of the story he found most difficult, not because of the physical pain he'd endured, but because it involved decisions that had cost him his legs and changed the lives of 12 families forever. As squad leader, I had to assess the tactical situation quickly. We had 4 Marines trapped in the overturned lead vehicle. They were alive but unconscious and couldn't extract themselves. The enemy fire was intensifying, and we were in an exposed position with limited cover. He paused, remembering the split-second calculations he'd made under fire. Our radio operator, Corporal Jenkins, was trying to call for backup, but the IED blast had damaged our communications equipment. We were getting intermittent signal at best. Even if backup was dispatched immediately, it would take 20 to 30 minutes for additional units to reach our position. 20 to 30 minutes is a lifetime in a firefight, Rodriguez observed. Exactly. The Marines in that overturned Humvee wouldn't last 20 minutes if we didn't act. They were unconscious, possibly seriously injured, and completely exposed to enemy fire. Thompson was riveted. So what did you decide? I had two choices. We could establish a defensive perimeter and try to hold our position until backup arrived, or we could take aggressive action to neutralize the ambush and extract the trapped Marines immediately. David's voice took on the matter-of-fact tone of a professional soldier explaining tactics. The defensive option was safer for my remaining Marines, but it probably meant losing the 4 in the overturned vehicle. The aggressive option gave them the best chance of survival, but it meant exposing additional Marines to enemy fire. What did you choose? I chose to attack. As squad leader, those Marines were my responsibility. All of them. David described what happened next with the clinical precision of someone who had replayed the scenario thousands of times in his mind. I identified the primary enemy firing position, a 2-story building about 200 meters to our northeast. The machine gun was positioned on the 2nd floor, giving them overlapping fields of fire on both our position and the disabled vehicle. He continued, I detailed 2 Marines to provide suppressive fire on the building while I maneuvered to a flanking position. The plan was simple. I would approach the building from the east side, where a collapsed wall provided concealment, and engage the machine gun position with grenades. Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. You went alone? It was a single-man infiltration. Taking more Marines would have increased the risk of casualties while reducing our suppressive fire capability. Sometimes the math is that simple. What David didn't say, what he never told anyone, was that he had known it was essentially a suicide mission. The 200-meter approach to the building would require crossing open ground under enemy observation. Even with suppressive fire from his Marines, the odds of reaching the target without being hit were minimal. The movement began at approximately 11:45 a.m. I left the relative safety of our vehicle and began moving across open terrain toward the enemy position. Thompson was holding his breath. What happened? I made it about 50 meters before taking the first hit. AK-47 round to the right thigh. Went down but kept moving. You learn to compartmentalize pain in situations like that. David's voice remained steady, but everyone listening could hear the weight of memory in his words. At the 100-meter mark, I took shrapnel from an RPG that detonated about 10 meters to my left. Multiple fragments to the left leg and lower abdomen. Sarah Mitchell had tears in her eyes. You kept going? The Marines in that vehicle were counting on me. Stopping wasn't an option. David continued his account with the same steady voice. At the 150-meter mark, another IED detonated. This one was probably command detonated, triggered by the enemy when they saw me approaching their position. It was a much larger blast than the roadside bomb that hit our convoy. He paused, and for the first time, his composure cracked slightly. That's when I lost my legs, both severed above the knee by shrapnel from the secondary IED. At that point, I couldn't walk, but I could still crawl. The security area had gone completely quiet. Even the usual airport sounds, announcements, rolling luggage, conversation, seemed muted as everyone strained to hear David's words. I crawled the remaining 50 meters to the building. Took about 15 minutes. Left a blood trail the whole way, but I reached the target. Rodriguez asked the question everyone was thinking. How did you complete the mission? I had 4 M67 fragmentation grenades remaining. I used all 4 on the machine gun position. The explosions eliminated the primary threat and allowed my Marines to reach the overturned vehicle. Thompson was amazed. You saved them. All 4 Marines were successfully extracted from the disabled vehicle. They sustained injuries from the initial IED blast, but none were life-threatening. They all returned to duty within 6 weeks. What about you? David's expression grew distant. I lost consciousness from blood loss shortly after throwing the last grenade. The medical evacuation team reached our position approximately 30 minutes later. By that time, I had lost both legs and required immediate field surgery to stabilize my condition for transport. The crowd around the security checkpoint had grown larger as David told his story. Passengers who had been impatient about delays now listened with rapt attention to this soft-spoken man's account of extraordinary heroism. Business executive Robert Chen, who had been complaining about his schedule just minutes earlier, felt ashamed of his earlier attitude. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I was frustrated about a minor delay when I should have been grateful for the sacrifice you made for all of us." David looked at him with genuine surprise. "No apology necessary, sir. You couldn't have known. But I should have been more patient, more respectful." Thompson stepped forward. "Sir, I'm the one who owes you an apology. My behavior was unprofessional and disrespectful. If I had known—" "Agent Thompson," David interrupted gently, "you were doing your job. Security protocols exist for good reasons. I have no complaints about your procedure. But I treated you like—" Thompson struggled for words. "Like any other passenger requiring additional screening, which is exactly what I am." David's response highlighted something fundamental about his character. He didn't expect special treatment because of his service or his sacrifice. He simply wanted to be treated with basic human dignity, the same thing everyone deserved. Jessica Rodriguez, still standing nearby, asked another question. "Sir, do you stay in touch with those Marines, the ones you saved?" David's face brightened for the first time since beginning his story. "Every single one of them. We call ourselves the Fallujah 12, the 4 who were trapped, plus the 8 from my squad who provided covering fire." 12? Thompson asked. "I thought you said 4 were trapped." 12 total Marines were on that patrol, 4 trapped, 8 in fighting positions. I was the 13th, the squad leader. All 12 of them made it home. Rodriguez felt tears forming in her eyes. They all survived? Not just survived. Thrived. 8 of them are married with children. 3 are still on active duty. 2 became drill instructors, passing on their combat experience to the next generation of Marines. 1 just made Sergeant Major last month. Sarah Mitchell asked, "Do you see them often?" "We have a reunion every year on March 27th, the anniversary of the Fallujah Patrol. We meet in different cities, depending on where everyone's stationed or living. Last year was in San Diego. This year it's in Dallas, which is why I'm traveling today." The revelation that David was traveling to meet with the Marines he had saved 15 years ago added another layer of poignancy to his story. This wasn't ancient history. It was a living brotherhood maintained through shared sacrifice and mutual respect. Thompson made a decision. "Sir, let me expedite your screening process and escort you to your gate personally." "That's not necessary, Agent Thompson." "It absolutely is necessary, sir. It's the least I can do." As Thompson finished the security screening with newfound respect and care, other passengers began approaching David. The businessman, Robert Chen, introduced himself. "Mr. Walsh, I'm Robert Chen. I run a consulting firm in Denver. If you ever need anything, medical care, transportation, anything at all, here's my card." Sarah Mitchell approached with her 2 children. "Kids, I want you to meet a real American hero. This is Mr. Walsh. He saved other soldiers' lives in Iraq." The 4-year-old looked up at David with wide eyes. "Are you a superhero?" David smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him that morning. "No, sweetheart. Just a regular Marine who did his job." "But Daddy's a Marine too," the child exclaimed. "Then your daddy is a very special person," David replied, "and you should be very proud of him." As the crowd around David's screening area continued to grow, airport personnel began to take notice. Terminal Supervisor Patricia Williams approached the scene, accompanied by Captain James Miller, the airport's security chief. "Mr. Walsh," Williams said respectfully, "we've been monitoring the situation. On behalf of Denver International Airport, I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced." "No inconvenience at all," David replied. "Everyone has been very professional." Captain Miller stepped forward. "Sir, I'm a Navy veteran myself. 20 years submarine service. What you did in Fallujah, that's the kind of courage they write about in training manuals." "I just did what any Marine would do for his brothers." "No, sir, with respect, that's not true. What you did was extraordinary by any measure." Miller continued, "Sir, I'd like to arrange a special escort to your gate, and I'm coordinating with Southwest Airlines to ensure you have priority boarding and any assistance you need." David started to protest, but Rodriguez interrupted. "Sir, let them do this. You've earned it 1,000 times over." As the security screening concluded, Thompson walked alongside David's wheelchair toward the departure gates. Other passengers in the area, having heard fragments of David's story, began applauding. The applause spread throughout the security area as word of David's heroism passed from person to person. David was clearly uncomfortable with the attention. He had spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of recognition, preferring to live quietly and honor his fallen and wounded brothers through private remembrance rather than public ceremony. "Agent Thompson," David said as they walked, "can I share something with you?" "Of course, sir." "This job you do, security screening, it's important work. You're protecting people, just like we protected people in Iraq. The difference is that your battlefield is here at home, and your enemies are harder to identify." Thompson was moved by David's perspective. "I never thought about it that way." Every day, you have to make quick decisions about people based on limited information. Most of the time, you get it right. When you get it wrong, it's usually on the side of being too careful rather than not careful enough. That's the right way to err. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you." As they reached gate C-32, the Southwest Airlines ground crew was waiting. Customer service representative Maria Santos approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Walsh, welcome. Your story has reached our crew, and we're honored to have you aboard today. We've upgraded you to priority boarding, and our flight attendants have asked if they can personally thank you for your service." "That's very kind, but really not necessary." "Sir," Maria replied, "our captain today is also a veteran. Air Force, served in Afghanistan. He specifically requested the opportunity to meet you before departure." David realized that declining further would be more awkward than accepting gracefully. "I'd be honored to meet your captain." As boarding time approached, David found himself surrounded by a small group of fellow passengers who had heard his story. The businessman Robert Chen had missed his original flight to Chicago, but had rebooked on a later departure, specifically to spend more time talking with David. "Mr. Walsh," Chen said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about doing what any Marine would do. But that's not really true, is it? Not every Marine would have crawled 200 meters with severed legs to complete a mission." David considered the question seriously. "Every Marine I served with would have done the same thing in my position. We're trained to complete the mission regardless of personal cost. It's not heroism, it's just the way we're taught to think." Sarah Mitchell, the young military wife, had a different perspective. "Sir, my husband tells me about Marines like you in his letters. He says there are ordinary Marines, good Marines, and then there are Marines who become legends. You're the third type. I'm just a Marine who got lucky enough to bring his brothers home. Rodriguez, the flight attendant, had been listening to the conversations while staying nearby. Sir, may I ask you something personal? Of course. How do you do it? How do you live with injuries like that, and maintain such a positive attitude? David was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. The alternative is to let the injuries define my life. I can focus on what I lost, or I can focus on what I gained. What did you gain? Perspective, gratitude, the knowledge that 12 families still have their sons and fathers because of one bad day in Fallujah. When I have rough days, and I do have rough days, I think about their children, their grandchildren who exist because we brought those Marines home. Captain Michael Torres, the Southwest Airlines pilot, approached the gate area in his uniform. The silver wings on his chest and the bearing in his walk immediately identified him as the veteran Maria had mentioned. Mr. Walsh, I'm Captain Torres. I wanted to personally thank you for your service and let you know it's an honor to have you on our aircraft today. David shook the captain's hand. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your service as well. Afghanistan? Yes, sir. 3 deployments, flying cargo missions. Nothing like what you went through, but I understand the brotherhood. All service matters, Captain. The cargo you flew probably saved as many lives as any combat mission. Captain Torres was struck by David's humility and his immediate recognition of others' contributions. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how do you handle civilian life after experiences like Fallujah? Some days are harder than others, David admitted. But I've learned that purpose doesn't end when your military service ends. It just changes form. What do you mean? In Iraq, my purpose was protecting my Marines and completing the mission. Now, my purpose is honoring the sacrifice by living a life worthy of what it cost. As boarding began, David was invited to board first. The gate area erupted in spontaneous applause as he made his way down the jet bridge. Other passengers, many of whom had heard his story secondhand, stood and clapped in recognition of his service and sacrifice. On the aircraft, flight attendant Jennifer Walsh, no relation, approached David's seat. Sir, the entire crew knows your story. If there's anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let us know. I'm fine, thank you. But can I ask you to do something for the young woman traveling with 2 small children? She's a military spouse with a deployed husband. Maybe some extra attention for the kids? Jennifer was touched by David's concern for others, even in his moment of recognition. Absolutely, sir. We'll take good care of them. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Captain Torres came on the intercom with a special announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a very special passenger aboard our flight today. Mr. David Walsh is a Purple Heart recipient who saved 12 Marines in Iraq at great personal cost. Sir, this crew and everyone aboard this aircraft thanks you for your service and sacrifice. The passengers burst into applause, and many turned to look at David, who sat quietly in his window seat, clearly moved by the recognition but still uncomfortable with the attention. During the 2-hour flight to Dallas, several passengers approached David to thank him personally. A retired teacher named Eleanor Davis sat with him for nearly an hour, sharing stories of her late husband's service in Vietnam. My Harold never talked much about the war, she told David, but he would have understood what you did. He would have been proud to know you. A college student named Marcus Williams, traveling home to see his family, admitted that David's story had changed his perspective on military service. I've been thinking about joining the Marines after graduation. Hearing what you went through, it makes me want to serve even more. The Marine Corps will teach you things about yourself you never knew, David told him. "But make sure you're joining for the right reasons. Not for glory or excitement, but because you want to be part of something bigger than yourself." As the aircraft began its descent into Dallas, David looked out the window at the Texas landscape below. Somewhere down there, 11 of his Marines, now middle-aged men with families and careers, were preparing for their annual reunion. When the plane landed at Dallas Love Field Airport, David was surprised to find a small reception waiting at the gate. Airport personnel, off-duty airline employees, and even some passengers from other flights had gathered after hearing his story through social media posts from Denver. At the center of the impromptu gathering stood a figure David recognized immediately. Former Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, not to be confused with Flight Attendant Jessica Rodriguez, one of his Marines from Fallujah, now a civilian working for Southwest Airlines at Love Field. "Sergeant Walsh," Rodriguez called out, using David's old rank with a grin. "Welcome to Dallas, you magnificent Marine." David laughed, the first truly joyful sound he'd made all day. "Rodriguez, you look old and gray. Civilian life has made you soft." "Same to you, Sarge. Same to you." The two men embraced, and David felt the familiar comfort of being with someone who truly understood the weight he carried every day. "How did you know I was coming in?" David asked. "Are you kidding? Your story from Denver is already everywhere online. Purple Heart veteran honored at airport security. We've been tracking your flight all morning." Rodriguez gestured to the crowd around them. "Word travels fast in the veteran community. These folks wanted to make sure you got a proper welcome to Texas." As David and Rodriguez made their way through the terminal toward ground transportation, Rodriguez filled him in on the reunion preparations. "Everyone's in town except Martinez. He's flying up from Houston tonight. We've got the usual hotel block reserved, and tomorrow we're doing something special." "What kind of special?" "You'll see. But trust me, after 15 years, we thought it was time to do something bigger than just dinner and war stories." That evening, at the hotel where the Fallujah 12 held their annual reunion, David sat in the hospitality suite, surrounded by men he hadn't seen in a year, but would trust with his life until his dying day. They were no longer young Marines. They were fathers, husbands, business owners, teachers, and civil servants. But in this room, they were brothers bound by shared experience and mutual sacrifice. Corporal James Peterson, now a high school principal in Oklahoma, raised his beer in a toast. "To Sergeant Walsh, 15 years later, still the finest Marine any of us ever served with." "To the Fallujah 12, David replied, "still the finest Marines I ever had the privilege to lead." As the evening progressed and the stories flowed, David realized that his encounter at Denver Airport that morning had been more than just an awkward moment that turned into recognition. It had been a reminder that his story, their story, still mattered. That the sacrifice made on a dusty street in Fallujah 15 years ago continued to resonate with people who understood the true cost of freedom. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, David looked at the dozens of messages that had accumulated on his phone throughout the day. Messages from the TSA agent Thompson, thanking him again and promising to treat every passenger with greater dignity. Messages from Sarah Mitchell, the military wife, telling him how his story had given her strength to face another deployment separation. Messages from Captain Torres, the airline pilot, and dozens of other people whose lives had been touched, however briefly, by his willingness to share his story. David had spent 15 years avoiding attention, preferring to honor his service through quiet dignity rather than public recognition. But perhaps, he thought, there was value in letting people see the real cost of war. Not just the statistics and news reports, but the human faces and personal sacrifices that those numbers represented. He thought about the young college student on the plane who was considering Marine Corps service. He thought about Agent Thompson, who would approach his job with new understanding of the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the people he screened every day. Most of all, he thought about the 12 Marines sleeping in hotel rooms throughout Dallas, successful men living full lives because someone had been willing to crawl 200 meters through enemy fire with severed legs to bring them home. That was legacy enough for any Marine. David Walsh's story reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, in wheelchairs, behind service counters, in airplane seats, and in countless other places where we might never think to look. They don't wear their medals or demand recognition. They simply continue to serve, in whatever way they can, long after their official service has ended. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Real Heroes Stories YouTube for more incredible tales of service, sacrifice, and quiet heroism. Tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And have you ever met someone whose hidden story changed your perspective on what real courage looks like? Remember, every person has a story. Sometimes the most important ones are the hardest to see.